Do you want to learn more about what causes autoimmune diseases, what tests we can run to find out some of the underlying causes? Do you want to truly prevent the onset of autoimmune diseases? We hope to provide answers to these questions tonight. I'm Dr. Ben Weitz, and thank you for joining us tonight. This is the Functional Medicine Discussion Group of Santa Monica. I hope you consider coming to some of our future events. We usually meet the last Thursday of the month. Next month, we have Kent Holtorf, and he's going to talk about fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue. In May, we have Dr. Darren Ingalls, and he just wrote a book about Lyme disease. And in June, we have Dr. Michael Ruscio, and he's going to speak about the gut and thyroid. And please check out my Rational Wellness podcast on iTunes and YouTube. A shameless plug. I want to thank Cyrex Labs and Metagenics, our co-sponsors for tonight's event. Cyrex's lab panels have all been designed by Dr. Vojdani and provide the most accurate testing for food sensitivities, leaky gut, immune reactions to chemicals and bacteria and viruses, etc. Cyrex is offering a 100% coupon code to be used towards any of their panels for those attending tonight. Metagenics?
100%.
What was it?
No,
Oh, $100. Sorry.
you cannot change your mind.
$100 for the panel. Do I hear 110? No. Metagenics offers the most advanced scientifically researched supplements for practitioners. For autoimmune diseases, one of their products is the Ultra Inflamex 360 medical food, which is an incredible meal replacement that helps you reduce the inflammatory burden and especially beneficial for patients with inflammatory gut disorders like ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. We're going to use a Q&A format, which will provide everybody an opportunity to participate. Anybody who wants to ask a question, raise your hand, and Kaylee's going to bring a microphone so everybody else can hear your question. Our special guest speaker this evening is someone who needs no introduction. Dr. Aristo Vojdani is the Chief Science Officer of Cyrex Labs, and he runs Immunosciences Labs. He's the father of modern immunology. He's a researcher who's published hundreds of scientific papers, and he's a sought-after speaker at medical conferences all around the world. He's one of the giants in the world of functional medicine, and we are so lucky that he has taken time out of his schedule to spend some time with us. Dr. Vojdani, thank you for joining us. So how did you first get interested in studying autoimmune diseases?
Okay. First of all, let me.
Is it working?
Working?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you hear me all the way in the back? So first of all, let me thank you.
Yeah. Which microphone is?
Now it's okay.
Okay.
So let me thank you to be here on this beautiful spring day, Passover night, and the Easter. So I do appreciate to see all of you sitting here while you could go and have fun out there. So I got involved or became interested in autoimmunity because my mother developed arthritis when she was 40 years old. Through 47 years she passed away at age 87, but she suffered for 47 years. I was witnessing all of that. So when I was doing my graduate school, my master, and then my PhD, I became interested to find out what was the root cause of her illness. To be honest with you guys, that if you go to a doctor these days, they spend so much time asking about this gene or that gene, what kind of disease your mother suffered, your father suffered, your uncle, your aunt. And really, they put so much emphasis on the genes, but they don't ask a question, what kind of work environment you are working? How is the environment of your home? All of that plays a significant role, but unfortunately, the mainstream of doctors that you go, they put so much emphasis on the genes. And so I, at that time, asked myself why my mother developed rheumatoid arthritis. So as a child, I remember she had oral infection. She was going to dental assistant. When she had full-blown infection, the dental assistant was removing or pulling out so many teeth at the same time without paying attention that so many toxins get released from that bacteria, can affect the immune system, and eventually the body turns against itself. That's the definition of autoimmunity. So that's why not only I got involved in the field of autoimmunity, my contribution to the field is why autoimmunity, why we develop autoimmunity. And that's exactly what's happening in the field of functional medicine. What is the main focus of functional medicine? Okay, at Loma Linda University, I was teaching 2 weeks ago, group of 25 students, 4th year, they become specializing in functional medicine. So I asked each one of them, tell me, what is the main focus of functional medicine? So what is it, please?
Root cause.
Thank you so much. So if that's the root cause, how come a disease that 53 million Americans suffering from, only few doctors that I know pay attention to the root cause? And so therefore, I'm so happy, ladies and gentlemen, you are here tonight, and you will hear more about the root cause of autoimmune diseases. We cannot say, okay, you have rheumatoid arthritis, let's do a blood test, and your rheumatoid factor is elevated. But I am here to ask, what is rheumatoid factor? So what is rheumatoid factor? Any answer? What is rheumatoid factor? So it's a blood test, right? But that's not my question. What is rheumatoid factor? Okay, rheumatoid factor is an IgM, your own antibody, attacking your own IgG. So then the next question is, why my IgM is attacking my own IgG? Isn't that something in the body binds to that IgG, and then our own immune system is going after another component of our immune system and eventually results in pathology. And I can go on, and I have some literature for you here that we are going to discuss a case report. For example, what is ASCA? Anti-Saccharomyces cerevisiae antibodies, which is a test, a blood test for diagnosing Crohn's disease. But really, what is ASCA? So we'll talk about that a little bit later. So for every disease, you can ask that question. If you ask the question, what are the causes of autoimmunities, you have to find them. Try to remove them from the environment of your patient, and then you are going to make a huge difference in this field. It is based on this philosophy that my own son, which is Elroy sitting here, that he decided to leave the field of interventional radiology and to become a functional medicine doctor. And I'm very proud of you.
We know that one of the potential triggers for autoimmune diseases is food sensitivities.
Okay.
And there's a lot of talk about gluten,
Yeah. Okay.
maybe we can talk about food sensitivities as related to autoimmune diseases.
But if allow me that to very fast to go through some of this literature we have in
Sure.
here. How many of you picked up this one? So I'm smart to promote my company, at the same time also put research articles for your observation. Okay? So what is this first article? This is from Journal of Autoimmunity. Development of autoantibodies precedes clinical manifestation of autoimmune disease, and then a comprehensive review. So what this article is telling us, that antibodies against environmental triggers, food, appear in the blood 3 to 20 years before the onset of autoimmune diseases. And so, ladies and gentlemen, practitioners, you have a window of opportunity for intervention. If you find the triggers, you can remove the triggers. Of course, you have to find them at early stage. Because at certain stage, you cannot reverse autoimmune disease because the damage is done. The tissue is gone. So if you detect at early stage, then you can make a huge difference and reverse the course of autoimmune disease. So this is the first article.
What do you think about using a elimination diet versus doing food sensitivity testing?
Okay. I will answer all of those, so let me go very fast now. Okay. So just bear with me a couple seconds. Now, is it the genes or the environment? So then the next article. The epigenetic mechanism for discordance autoimmunity in monozygotic twins. What is just from the title of the article? What do you guys understand?
Identical genetics, the gene.
Is it the gene or the environment, correct? So the answer is this, that if you look at certain diseases, type 1 diabetes, gene is 50%, meaning one twin will develop autoimmune disease, 50% chance the other twin will develop type 1 diabetes. So the gene plays a role in 50% of the cases. Rheumatoid arthritis, only 10%. One twin with rheumatoid arthritis, the other one, only 10% has a chance to develop rheumatoid arthritis. So they took the average of 10 plus 50 with all kind of diseases, not just those two. I just gave you an example. They came out with a number that gene is 30%, environment 70%. Can we change our gene? Can you do anything to, can you change your gene? No, right? It's too late, right? But we can change the environment. So 70% is the environment, therefore we can do a lot about it. And one of those environmental triggers causing autoimmunity is food. So, and we have many examples. Gluten is the best example that everybody knows. Everybody heard about it. But let's talk about wheat in general. Wheat has many proteins. Some of them called gluten proteins. They act like gluten, like glue. They are about 75% of the proteins of wheat. The non-gluten proteins are 20 to 25%. But there is something that only 2%, it's only 2% of wheat is called wheat germ agglutinin. But it's 100 times more pathogenic and causing autoimmunity. Why? Because that 2% of wheat components, it's hard to digest. Because it's lectins and agglutinins, wheat germ agglutinin. It's very hard to digest. And therefore, also we have receptors for wheat germ agglutinin and other agglutinins in the gut and every single tissue, including the brain. So undigested lectins and agglutinins, what will happen is going to bind to the receptors for lectins and agglutinins. What will be the result of that? Inflammation, release of inflammatory cytokines, opening the tight junctions, And now other food antigens can get into the blood. Now we make antibodies against Weitz gluten proteins, non-gluten proteins, other foods, and if due to structural similarity between many foods with human tissue, now the antibodies produced against food are going to attack our tissue. Now what shall we do? Elimination diet. First of all, there are many laboratories do food IgG testing. And I developed the food IgG testing in 1986. Unfortunately, they continued doing the same thing since 1986 without changing a damn thing. Everything is the same. Okay? But for Cyrex, we went through 3 to 5 years of purification of antigens, and then we focused this whole issue on food as a cause of autoimmunity. And so, if you react to certain food and done reliably, and if that food cross-react with your tissue, and let me give you a few examples. Gluten cross-react with brain, and so that's why gluten ataxia. And gluten has a protein small peptide called gluteomorphines. Exactly acts like morphine. We have receptors in the brain for that, bind to those receptors, causing inflammation in the brain, migraine headaches, and name it. And so that's why this is a classical example. If you react to gluten, Weitz casein, and many other foods which cross-react with human tissue, rotation diet is not the right thing to do. You have to eliminate that food from your diet probably forever. Otherwise, the cascade of inflammation will continue. Did I answer your question?
And we need to test for more than just gluten.
Of course. Example, if we take a patient with lupus, take blood from a patient with lupus. Patient with lupus produce antibodies against their own DNA, right? Double-stranded DNA antibody. And also SSA, SSB, SMRNP, right? What are those? Ribonucleoproteins. What are ribonucleoproteins? Okay, if this is a cell, right? That you have in the membrane. Inside you have the nucleus. You have ribonucleoproteins. Why do we make antibody against our own ribonucleoprotein? Any ideas? Okay, so anyway, something causes that, right? So we produce antibodies against our own nuclear material. So if we take a patient with lupus, take some blood from that patient, and purify it against ribonucleoproteins. So we call that affinity purified antibody from patients with lupus, and then reacted with food. About 10 different food will react to that. Corn, soy, tomato, and few others. If you have that knowledge and you run a test through Cyrex and your patient is reacting to those items, and if your patient is having symptomatology of early lupus, I promise you, by removing those 4 or 5 foods from the diet, they will improve significantly. And so, unfortunately, it's not available. That's why I wrote 7 different articles through a journal called Alternative Therapies. You can get it online, Jema, right? It is available online version.
It is.
Are we, Dr. Weitz, are we getting the email addresses from everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll email it to everybody who's here.
I highly recommend to read those articles because I'm giving the details. It's not just gluten. It's not just casein. There are many other foods. Let me give you another example. In the brain, the blood-brain barriers, we have a molecule called aquaporin, water channel protein. But tomato, soy, corn, and spinach also have aquaporin. When you put these two side by side, from molecular structure, there is 70% similarity between these two molecules. Our brain aquaporin versus vegetables aquaporin. And that's why in Japan, because consume these products so much, they develop not MS, they develop neuromyelitis optica, which is subclass of lupus. And so again, if you have a patient with MS-like syndrome, with lupus, with neuromyelitis optica, isn't that wise to remove those 4 items from their diet? So the list goes on and on and on. I have a case report for you in here that if we'll have a chance to talk about. It's about ASCA. Before that, we talked about ASCA, anti-Saccharomyces cerevisiae antibody. So is it okay to go through this case?
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
so very fast. Okay, this is a patient with IBD. Positive breath test. On FODMAP diet is not improving. Okay? Clinical condition became worse, going from a doctor to another doctor to get an answer. One of the doctors ordered ASCA, anti-Saccharomyces cerevisiae IgA antibody. And then it was borderline. They thought the patient is having Crohn's disease. Yes, Crohn's, no Crohn's. Then they put that patient on yeast-free diet because where is ASCA coming from? Brewer's yeast and baker's yeast. Thank you. Okay, now, then they ordered a test through Cyrex. What they found that gamma gliadin, out of all those components of wheat, gamma gliadin was 4+. Transglutaminase, which is tissue in our gut, 1+.
And if you would have done a food sensitivity test from another company, they never would have measured.
Specifically that item, no. So that's why a correct test is going to help you to define or find the cause of the illness.
Right, most companies just do alpha gliadin, right?
Right. Thank you. So patient put on gluten-free diet for 6 months, but no change. Okay, so what's happening? What happened that the issue of Candida albicans was ignored. That's why I have 3 articles for you in here about Candida albicans. Why Candida albicans? If you ignore that, the patient still is going to have Crohn's disease-like syndrome. Because in these 3 articles, they found the pathogenic antigen of Crohn's disease really is not ASCA. Because ASCA from yeast, brewer's yeast, and baker's yeast, it is because for the first time they found in brewer's yeast and baker's yeast. But later on they found the real origin of that is coming from Candida albicans. And this is a message tonight. It's a really very important message. If you ignore Candida albicans in patients with Crohn's disease, they will never get better. So, patient got, because of that, vaginal candidiasis. Okay? And the GI symptomatology also became worse. Then repeated ASCA became 5+, and at Cyrex doing very special tests for Candida. It's called Candida hyphae. When Candida becomes spore-like, it exactly looks like this, spores of Candida exactly looks like this microphone. On top of this, there is an antigen, acts like gluten, like gamma gliadin. That's why the patient was reacting to gamma gliadin. Okay? So, Candida acts like gluten, binds to the epithelial cells, penetrates the tissue, and causing real candidiasis. So unless you treat for Candida, patients with Crohn's disease are not going to improve. So that's exactly what happened. So conclusion that it is unlikely that exogenous yeast found in foodstuffs would be the unique origin of antibodies prevalent in Crohn's disease. Candida albicans, a human yeast, is closely related to Saccharomyces cerevisiae, a food yeast, which is in the food. Candida albicans can act as an immunogen for ASCA. That's why these 3 articles, if you look at them, Candida albicans is an immunogen for anti-Saccharomyces. The next one is giving you the mechanism. Humoral immunity links Candida albicans, infection, and celiac disease. Candida albicans causes celiac disease. So don't be surprised if you have non-celiac gluten sensitivity or even celiac disease. You go on gluten-free diet, you don't improve, you have to pay attention to Candida because you did not pay attention to Candida. But that test only could be done by Cyrex because that's the only company they measure antibodies against this specific antigen mentioned in this article, the hyphae antigen.
And which array is that from?
It's part of array 12. That is done with at least another 28 different pathogens and antigens. Okay? So now, any question regarding this before to move to the second case? Anybody question? Okay? Ben?
So how does testing for Candida albicans in serum differ from testing for Candida albicans in, say, stool?
That is fantastic question. Okay? All right. So I wanted to have a little bit fun.
So Candida.
I was earlier talking about Candida using that, the head of microphone penetrating inside the tissue. When you measure Candida in the stool, are you going to detect that Candida? No. Right? So Candida in the culture is useless. In fact, people who have real problem with Candida will have low yeast count in the stool. Only when Candida penetrates the tissue, releasing an antigen, the body produces antibody and only could be detected by antibodies. Don't waste your money ordering stool testing. Okay? So what was the question again?
Repeat it.
I asked what was the difference between testing for Candida in the serum versus testing for Candida in the stool.
So in the stool, whatever is not bound to tissue goes into the stool. When Candida binds to human tissue, becomes pathogenic. Releasing that antigens into the blood, we make antibody against that. And then antibody is detected reliably in the blood. And also, even if some laboratories measuring antibody in the stool, The same answer. The best way to measure antibody in the blood.
But there is quite a bit of data that correlate specific bacteria, viruses, protozoans, etc., that correlate directly with specific autoimmune diseases, aren't there?
In the stool or in the blood?
In the stool.
I don't think so. Where is the evidence? Okay.
I recently interviewed Dr. David Brady, and we had a whole chart of this specific pathogen links to this specific autoimmune
Yes,
disease.
specific pathogens, absolutely, we'll talk about that. Pathogens, exactly like food, cross-react with human tissue or through 10 different mechanisms can cause autoimmunity.
So doesn't
This is
Yersinia
different,
in the
I'm
stool
sorry.
link with?
This is different from detecting pathogens in the stool. Yes, let's take example, Klebsiella
Okay.
or E. coli, simple E. coli, okay? If you detect it in the stool, everybody is having E. coli in the stool.
Well, it's a question of how much.
Okay, yes. So, but enteropathogenic E. coli, again, binds to the receptors in the gut, and you are not going to detect it in the stool.
Why?
So, because it's bound to the epithelial cells.
Okay, okay.
I'm attacking you.
What about Candida glabriata? Does that also cause similar problems?
Yes, all three yeasts, yes. The question was, I think if I heard, there is Candida albicans, Tropicalis, and glabrata. Each of those, they release that toxin or that specific antigens goes into the blood, and the patients make antibody against that. Now, I was talking about E. coli, for example. E. coli, if produces, or Campylobacter jejuni, Klebsiella, if they produce lipopolysaccharide, which is highly toxicogenic, or bacterial cytolethal distilling toxin, which Dr. Pimentel,
Right, the cause of SIBO. in some
cause of
cases.
SIBO, we're talking about that also, right? Now, we have research that we did and just accepted in Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, okay? If you produce antibodies against E. coli, Salmonella, Shigella, Klebsiella, that antibody in the blood, if blood-brain barriers are broken, can cross the barriers, bind to amyloid beta, and causing amyloid plaque. So can you detect that in the stool, my friend? I'm talking to the camera. Yeah, what do you think? Can you detect that in the stool?
No.
Thank you. So one time you can invite all those people to come here, sit down, and have intelligent conversation. But they have to do, what is the advantage of really working in the laboratory? That, you are hands-on, you do your own research, and you investigate every day the issues. Please.
So if I were to summarize, does that mean you're saying that it's not the presence of a pathogen, but the antibodies to the pathogen that tells us that there's a problem?
Yes, that's correct. Yes, please, question here.
So if you have a salmonella infection, it predisposes you to Alzheimer's?
If, listen to this, if Salmonella releases lipopolysaccharides
When it does.
and bacterial cytolethal distilling toxin, opening your gut barriers, get into the blood, you make antibodies. Now listen to this carefully. That antibody can circulate in your blood for years. No harm is done. But suddenly you get stress, certain stress, bad news, God forbid. And your blood-brain barriers get open. Unfortunately, those antibodies can get into your blood and into your brain and cause amyloidogenesis. Yes, only under those circumstances. So let's, I'm not saying that, yes, we get food poisoning, Campylobacter jejuni, you are going to develop Alzheimer's. No, body is victorious. We have several levels of protection. That's why we have blood-brain barriers, gut barriers, and other barriers.
So, what about chemicals of causing autoimmune diseases?
Okay, thank you. Beautiful question. So regarding the infection, we know many pathogens through different mechanisms, releasing toxins, other molecules, cross-react with human tissue, or sometimes, think about a virus. A patient is having normal thyroid. A virus comes along, damaging the thyroid tissue antigen is getting released, and then you make antibodies against your own thyroid tissue antigen. The results of that becomes thyroid autoimmunity. There are many mechanisms. There are hundreds or thousands of different pathogens through different mechanisms can cause autoimmunity. Now chemicals.
Yeah, but still, if we know that Yersinia, say, tends to correlate with thyroid antibodies, and you do a stool test and they have elevated Yersinia, doesn't it make sense to?
In the case of Yersinia, I do agree with you. So I'm not saying completely stool testing is useless. For some, for some cases are important to order, and they're important to look at the results. Yeah. Please.
My question is, most I've seen people with hyperthyroid, and I don't really understand why the body's going to a hyper state specifically rather than a hypo, which is most of our conditioning. What is the pathology that's driving the organism into a hyperthyroid? Is that okay for this class?
Yeah, maybe like, why does somebody have an autoimmune reaction to their thyroid that ends up with hyperthyroid versus hypothyroid?
We don't know exactly why some patients go to hyper, some they go to hypo. Really, we don't know. But I can tell you that all three factors, food, toxic chemicals, and pathogens, can cross-react with thyroid tissue, resulting in autoimmunity. Here we have two articles at the end completely. Look at the list of foods that Dr. Karazian and myself, that's why I made a copy of that page. 20 different foods cross-react with thyroid. So isn't that wise to remove those food items from the diet of patients with thyroid autoimmunity? If they react, you order array 10, and these foods are positive, then highly recommended. Or you could say, I really don't want to spend money. My patient doesn't have any money. I can go automatically remove those 25 foods from the diet. You could do that. God bless you. So then the same thing about islet cell antibodies, another 25 foods. So this is a new field that we are contributing a lot. My laboratory, with help of Cyrex, Dr. Karazian, we are a team that's studying cross-reactivity and autoimmunity. The three triggers: food, toxic chemicals, and infection. And so these are some of the examples. Now, back to the chemicals, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, chemicals are small molecules. From immunological point of view, they do not challenge the immune system, right? Because the immune system, in order to be challenged by foreign material, that foreign material should be large enough so the lymphocyte is going to attack it. But in the case of chemicals or their metabolites bind to human tissue. And then the body goes after the chemicals plus that specific tissue. So that's how chemical causing or inducing autoimmunity. Classical example I'm bringing in here because we have an article And we have a case that formaldehyde, which is in hair products. If any of you did Brazilian blowout, you expose yourself to 11% formaldehyde. Believe me, in the laboratory, when we, some pathologists try to clean the lab, they use 2% formaldehyde. I will not be able to walk in that laboratory when they clean it with formaldehyde. So imagine 11%. So first of all, even if you read the labels, you are not going to find out, because they don't write formaldehyde. There's a gimmick in here. They give a different name. And so the beauticians, they tell you there is no formaldehyde in this. But believe me, between 3 to 11 or 12% formaldehyde in a Brazilian blowout.
Yeah.
And that's why I included a case. Please talk about that.
Yeah, this study, the woman got this hair treatment, and they used a product that was formaldehyde free, except it had a chemical that as soon as you heated it, it turned into formaldehyde.
So to summarize this in one word, actually we these days at IFM, Institute of Functional Medicine, we talk about exposome, human exposome, and which is responsible for the induction of so many diseases, including autoimmunity. The part about chemicals, it's called human adductome, A-D-D-U-C-T-O-M-E. What's the meaning of adductome? Meaning chemicals such as formaldehyde, bisphenol A, tetrabromobisphenol A, mercury, other heavy metals, other chemicals, after entering into the body, bind to our tissue, hemoglobin, albumin, and then forming a new adduct. The adducts get detected by the radar, which is our immune system, going after it, making antibodies, then those antibodies are detected in the blood. That's why Array 11 is focused on this issue of chemicals. Now, regarding measurements in the laboratory, many laboratories measuring levels of chemicals, aflatoxin, mycotoxins, bisphenol A, in the urine and in blood. I promise you that every single one of us sitting here, if you measure level of bisphenol A in your urine, 90% will have high levels of bisphenol A, which is the plastic material in your urine, right? And again, this takes us back to the thyroid issue. Bisphenol A competes with thyroid hormone. That's why it's called endocrine disruptors. So it's not only is for your thyroid patients, not only you have to remove those foods from the diet, you have to remove all these chemicals from the environment of the patients. Otherwise, your patient is not going to improve. So you have to remove the food. You have to identify, for example, Yersinia enterocolytica. We do antibodies, but you can do also stool testing. And also you have to look at some of these toxic chemicals. Otherwise, your patients with thyroid disorder are not going to improve. So that's when chemicals bind to human tissue, our immune system goes after the chemicals as well as our own tissue, resulting in autoimmunity. So exposome, adductome, those are the new words that we are going to talk about in the upcoming annual meeting of IFM, Institute of Functional Medicine. I'm going to talk about the role of environmental triggers in autoimmunity and the proper laboratory testing. Please.
It was my understanding, at least a couple years back, that if your immune markers are deficient or overactive, that some of your tests will not be accurate. Am I correct on that? And if so, do you suggest testing people's IgG, IgA, IgM first before going through some of the expense of your big tests?
Okay. Did you understand the question?
Yeah, no, can you repeat it?
Let's. If the patient is having some kind of immunodeficiencies, meaning the total IgG, total IgM, total IgA is low, when you test that patient for antibodies, are you going to get false negative results? Absolutely yes. Thank you for asking that. So, if you measure those individuals between probably 2, maximum 5% of the population. So it is wise to measure total immunoglobulins if they are, again, let me give you an example of IgG. Normal range for me is around 1,000 milligram per deciliter. Your patient is having 250, definitely will affect the test results. How about 500? Maybe yes, maybe not. But some doctors, even that, they order the test, and then they say that because 1,000 is normal range, my patient is having 500, I'm going to multiply the results by 2, factor of 2, and then calculate whether or not the patient is having elevated antibodies. Why the laboratory cannot do it for you? Because against the law. But your practitioners could do it in your office.
So 500 would be like the minimum that you suggested.
To me, 500 is the minimum, yes.
Thank you.
Is it a direct times 2? Is that a safe measure to use times 2?
If it's 500 versus 1,000, that's time 2. If it's 500 versus, for example, if it's 750 times 1.5. If it's 250 versus 1,000, you have to multiply by 4. So you have to go back to school and know your math.
Is that just for your food test though?
I'm sorry?
Just for the food?
For everything you may get, but again, that's very small percentage of population.
Is that IgG total, is that included in the panel?
Right now, no, but it will be available hopefully soon. But it's very cheap test, $20, $30. You could do it through any laboratory.
What about when the stool test report on total IgA?
Okay, you like to take me back to that, right?
Back to the basics.
Okay. Definitely we have secretory IgA in the gut, right? What is the purpose of secretory IgA? That's our first line of defense to protect us against any foreign material that we become in contact through the GI tract. So there is turnover of IgA. IgA is usually binds to epithelial cells like a layer of protection to prevent entry of unwanted antigens to the submucosa and then into the circulation. The turnover of that, when cells die, that IgA get released and we can detect that in the stool. But the problem with the stool is this, that how can you purify IgA from the stool? First of all, let's say, how a laboratory is purifying IgA from the stool in order to measure it? They have to use some chemicals, right? And those chemicals can affect the level of secretory IgA. Okay? You are surprised? So, But if you measure it in saliva we don't have all those factors. Imagine, what do we have in the stool? We have the bacteria, the parasites, the food antigens. Some of that IgA get absorbed to all those bacteria and viruses, whatever we have in the stool. Even with the best purification system, you are not going to purify that IgA from the stool. Therefore, for me, IgA in the stool is inaccurate. And we did some comparison between saliva and stool and blood many years ago with the laboratory doing all of that. We did not find any correlation between stool IgA versus saliva and blood IgA. But there was correlation between saliva IgA and blood IgA. I'm changing your mind next time not to use that test. Any other questions? Or if not, we are going to discuss the second case. All right?
Sounds good.
Okay. So very short, because this is very lengthy, that it's about exposome and thyroid autoimmunity. A 40-year-old woman working for 15 years in a beauty salon. And she develops nasal burning, migraine headaches, enlargement of the lymph nodes, CBC, chemistry, normal, anti-nuclear antibody, which is a test for autoimmunity, right? Anti-nuclear antibody. Borderline elevation, rheumatoid factor, borderline elevation, CD4-CD8 ratio. This is another way to look at cellular immune deficiency or overactivation of the immune system. It's because antibody is part of the humoral immunity. The CD4-CD8 and others are part of cellular immunity. So CD4-CD8 ratio 3.8, the normal is 3.0. So this lady is having immune activation. The immune system is very activated. It's like in the car. The accelerator is, you push too much, and then the brake doesn't work. That's helper versus suppressor cells. So in this case, the engine is running too fast. Just based on that test, you can predict autoimmunity in the future. Just to when you do CD4-CD8 ratio. So for 5 years, she goes from practitioner to practitioner, and no relief. During those 5 years, 35 pounds gained 35 pounds, and her thyroid becomes enlarged, that you could see it with naked eye. Now, anti-nuclear antibodies 1 to 160 went up. Thyroid peroxidase, which was normal before, now is 1,680, much more than 500. So they put her on thyroid support, no improvement, and the option was surgery. She refused to do that. And then, again, being very happy, finally she goes to a functional medicine doctor, like one of you sitting here. And
Isn't it crazy that somebody has thyroid antibodies attacking her thyroid, and you just take Synthroid and doesn't do anything about this underlying attack on
that's
the thyroid?
exactly the heart of the matter. You got it? So finally someone asked her about her profession. Where do you work? How many doctors are asking you guys when you go to another doctor, what's your profession? So I do work in a beauty salon. That was the answer. And what kind of exposure she had? Hair coloring 20 times per week. For other people, not for herself. Hairspray, you know, that's a killer for me. When I go to haircut and the lady sitting over here, they finish the job and then they spray that damn thing is really, it's killing me. Okay, so 30 times per week. You know how many chemicals are in that spray? 200 different chemicals. And then Brazilian blowout called keratin. I didn't know that. I thought keratin is some kind of vitamin. It's put on the skin to improve the health of your skin. But I read about this and I found that that's equal to Brazilian blowout. Okay? Now, wheat germ oil, 16 times a week. Do you get it now? Wheat germ agglutinin, wheat germ oil. So the doctor decided to order chemical immune reactivity screen, which is array 11. And I'll tell you what was positive. And then wheat proteome immune reactivity, and food immune reactivity, and multiple autoimmune reactivity screen, which is food is array 10, and multiple autoimmune reactivity is array 5. And then guess what, you know, the results were. Formaldehyde antibody were elevated. Are you surprised? Okay, because Brazilian blowout contains up to 12% formaldehyde. And you get exposed, formaldehyde forms adductome, you react against combination of the two. Okay. Tetrabromobisphenol A are elevated. Mercury, mixed heavy metals. Believe me, in all these products there is heavy metals as well. And so antibodies against those were elevated. But what was very, very interesting, wheat antibody was almost negative. But wheat germ agglutinin was 5 times higher than reference range. Just because you take the wheat germ oil, there is wheat germ agglutinin and other proteins in that oil. It's not pure, 100% pure oil. Okay? So that's why. So laboratory testing showed exposure, and there is no choice but removing these triggers. Because the patients already had other antibodies, parietal cell antibodies, liver antibodies, brain antibodies, and more. So based on that, IV glutathione, and then to examine whether really, this is very important, the cause and effect relationship. A wise clinician sending the patient for 2 weeks vacation in Hawaii or somewhere else. No hair cutting, not being exposed to all of that. And then after 2 weeks, she comes back to you, ask question, how do you feel? I feel great. So now you show the cause and effect relationship. So to make the story short, after treatment, IV glutathione, vitamin C, especially ultra potency, IV also possible. All of that together, whatever you guys are doing, plus helping the gut, Entrovite, because contains acetate, butyrate, propionate for the gut, altogether, repeat of the test, almost all the tests after 6 months or a year, reduced by 50%, and these patients on the road to recovery, because the doctors identified the triggers, removed the triggers, and advice was, from now on, only you are going to do haircut. Otherwise, you have to change your profession. Okay, now we are ready for additional discussion. So that's why that case is important to read about.
So there's been a lot of discussion about just avoiding lectins. It says they put her on a lectin-free diet, and so we have practitioners out there saying everybody should just automatically avoid lectins. What do you think about that recommendation?
100% yes. 100% yes. But
But you know, there's like
No,
at least
no.
50 different common
Okay.
fruits and vegetables that have
Yes.
lectins in them.
Okay, now, very good question. So, if you order a test, laboratory test, reliably done by Cyrex, and your agglutinins are positive, and believe me, when germ agglutinin is positive, another 130 foods will be positive. So, if you remove 132 foods out of 200, what else is left for the patient to eat? You are going to do more harm than helping that patient. You have to find what is the cause of 132 foods to be positive.
Leaky gut?
No, wheat germ agglutinin, soy agglutinins causing leaky gut. Yes, you are right. But you know, many laboratories, without really knowing the physiology and mechanism, they blame everything on leaky gut. But you can react to wheat germ agglutinin without having leaky gut.
I've heard a number of practitioners say if you get one of these food sensitivity tests, I think even Dr. Krosian said it, if you get food sensitivity test and you just have like, 80, 100 different, that must mean you have leaky gut if you're reacting to that many foods.
That is one possibility. But again, remember, we have other routes that food can get into the blood. That's additional tests that we are going to develop in the future, and we'll talk about that. So the gut is not the only way.
For the liver?
There are, through blood vessels, food antigens can get into the liver. Yes.
Really?
Yes.
How's that?
That's next time we'll discuss that. It's called gut vascular permeability. The gut structure is perfect, but the vasculatures somehow take up, the blood vessels take up the antigen and taking it to the liver.
So there's no
Gut
problem
vascular
with
permeability.
So there's no problem with the mucosa of the gut or the endothelium. There's a totally separate mechanism.
Absolutely different mechanism completely. But I don't want to confuse the audience in here today. But leaky gut could be one reason, but also other possibilities. There are other possibilities. So if you react to wheat germ agglutinin, believe me, I took monoclonal antibody. Elroy was working with me. Monoclonal antibody made against lectins and agglutinins, wheat germ agglutinin, soy agglutinin, peanut agglutinin, reacted with 210 different foods. With wheat germ agglutinin, we got 132. So, if you remove that from the diet, believe me, the patient is going to improve. Now, regarding the other sources of lectins and agglutinins, beans, if you cook them very, very well, you are going to destroy the lectins and agglutinins. Okay?
Soak them overnight, that also destroys
Absolutely,
them, right?
yeah. So if you look at the Hispanic custom, I think that's what they are doing. Overcooking the beans to destroy the lectins and agglutinins. And also we have done many experiments together. If you take raw versus cooked food, in majority of the cases, vegetables, raw versus cooked, and you react them with anti-agglutinins, the levels of lectins and agglutinin reactivity goes down by 80% after cooking.
Even with light steaming?
No, I said Very well cooking.
We're all steaming our vegetables light because we don't want to lose all the phytonutrients.
So again, yes, you're absolutely right. There are lectins and agglutinins in almost many fruits and vegetables. Even potatoes, we have lectins and agglutinins. So we have to cook them well, so those lectins and agglutinins will be destroyed, and therefore, then we could consume those.
Yeah, I mean,
but
you
find the
virtually-
major trigger. The message is find the major triggers. The two major ones are soy agglutinins and wheat germ agglutinins. Peanuts, for example, reacted with only 20 peanut agglutinin. But wheat germ agglutinin, 130, 140. Soy with 100. Peanuts only with 20.
So that's another reason to cross soy off the list.
Right. So this is really new paradigm, that new findings. I didn't know this a year ago when I had the honor to be in here. So we are learning every day. We are doing research, and so we are here to share with you some of our findings. Okay, question?
Same with nuts, if you soak them overnight and then either dehydrate them or low cook them.
What do I? Nuts, yes.
Lectins, if you soak the nuts.
Who's gonna soak their nuts? Do you really soak your nuts?
I buy them sprouted.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I tried, but are you saying would that be a better thing for, to better digest your nuts and get rid of lectins, is to soak them?
I'm not sure if the nuts, I don't think they have lectins and agglutinins,
Oh, okay.
but they have many proteins,
Yeah.
okay? And we found, unfortunately, in a case of nuts, let's say peanuts or almonds.
Which is not peanuts on a nut.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Almond, okay? After cooking, their allergenicity and antigenicity becomes higher. So in majority of the cases, we destroy lectins and agglutinins, but in the case of proteins of nuts, after roasting, they do, even they become more antigenic. That's why about 8 years ago, I published this article in the Journal of Metabolism, Nutrition and Metabolism. That was the journal. You can go online and find that. We took food, cooked versus uncooked, and we found some patients reacted to cooked, but not to uncooked, and vice versa. Some reacted to the cooked, but not to uncooked.
So avoid beans or cook them very well,
Yes.
but your nuts you should eat raw.
So if really you will ask me what is the worst antigen, my answer will be wheat germ agglutinin followed by soy bean agglutinin. Liz.
I have a question then, with soybeans, now people are buying fermented, sprouted soy. So does that also destroy the agglutinins in the soy when you sprout or you ferment the soy?
I can answer your question only based on my own personal experience. There is a product in the market which is fermented soy, is given to cancer patients. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah. What's the name?
Okay.
Ialgan.
Yeah, thank you.
What was it?
What is it called?
Ialgan.
Okay.
Can you repeat that? What is it called?
High algae.
Ialgan,
Right.
H-A-E-L-I-A-N.
So
And
years ago,
it has anti-cancer properties of some kind?
it has. But from allergenic point of view, they gave me a bottle. They wanted me to investigate that in comparison to raw proteins of soy. We found the fermented was 5 times more allergenic. But for cancer patient, they don't have a choice. You think about allergy. If that can help a patient with cancer, why not? Use it. But be careful with allergenicity of those fermented material, especially soy.
So one of the strategies that some doctors who specialize in the gut are doing is using therapeutic worms, and they seem to downregulate autoimmune diseases. I wonder what kind of mechanism that can play.
Very good. Thank you. Okay. When a child is born, okay, the immune system is not perfect yet. So it's more Th2 dominant, like this. The balance is in a balanced immune system, right? So it's born like this. The more the child gets exposed to environmental factors, the soil bacteria, the environmental bacteria, bacteria from the relatives, breast milk, and many more, that balance, the broken balance becomes back to this way. From this way, becomes back to this way. So Th1 and Th2 becomes balanced. So any imbalance after that, after a year, the child is having a balanced immune system under normal conditions, but any environmental triggers can break that balance, go to the right or to the left. If it goes to Th1, possible autoimmunity. If it goes to the right, T helper 2, possible allergies, inflammation, and all of that. So many patients who have problem in the gut, they are more Th2, some of them Th1 dominant, some of them Th2 dominant. T helper 1 versus T helper 2. Okay? Those who are Th1 dominant, if you give them worms, what do they do, worms? The worms causing, Th2 to become more active. So Th1, the inflammatory reactions will go down, balanced immune system, and therefore patient with chronic gastritis, IBS will improve significantly because of giving them those worms. But some will ask, what will happen to those worms in my body after that? Can you answer?
Well, I mean, some of the therapeutic worms that doctors are using now are worms that will stop reproducing. They have a limited life cycle in humans. They use like the porcine whipworm, for example, and it only lives a certain amount of time, so you have to keep ingesting it. I don't know if everybody's familiar with the use of parasitic worms as a therapy.
What about if that parasite or worm is female? Each one of them will make thousands more worms in the gut. What will happen then?
Well, right now the worms that most doctors are using are worms that will.
And by the way, there's no male and female worms.
So, is this the same mechanism by which fecal microbial transplant will help with reducing inflammation in patients? There's a number of studies, case studies of patients with inflammatory bowel disorder who had fecal microbial transplant and got a lot better.
Fecal microbial transplant from healthy individual
Right.
to an unhealthy individual works for few months. Unfortunately, the data shows after 6 months they go back to where they were before.
But that's if nothing else changes.
I'm sorry?
Isn't that if nothing else changes?
Yes, thank you. So the mechanism could be two different mechanisms. We don't know. Learning every day. Please.
Speaking of children, is there like a limit or like a too young of an age for someone to get these tests? Because I've had some doctors on the Cyrex tell me, because I work with children and a lot of times people want to get testing, and I've been told that sometimes you have to wait until they're like 11 to really get an accurate outcome.
Okay, you got it. Let's go to the basics.
Okay.
At what age the immune system is almost perfect?
20?
No. The immunoglobulins, let's take immunoglobulins, IgG, IgM, IgA, almost at age 2 or 3, almost equivalent to adults. IgA in saliva in 3 months. Why? Because we need the first line of defense. Isn't that beauty of the nature? The first line of defense is in place in the first 3 months. But the other immunoglobulins, the first year, in 80% of the cases, they are there. The difference really between a child of 2 years old versus 10 or 20 years old is only 20%. So if I will have a practice and dealing with children, I'll order blood. Children of 2 years old, and you could add a factor of 20%, something very general. Because laboratory, because of the law, they have to go according to what is written in the textbook of immunology. And unfortunately, most of the time, textbook of immunology is wrong.
Could you write a new textbook?
He's got 3 books he's working on.
Actually, our first book is coming out about food-associated autoimmunities by Springer. And now we are writing the pathogen-associated autoimmunities. And hopefully, the third one will be about chemical-associated autoimmunities. So just talking about textbook, that classically in the field of immune system, they tell us half-life of IgG is 21 days. Half-life of IgM is about 15 or 18 days. So how come many of us, we had Epstein-Barr virus 20 or 30 years ago, still we have IgG against Epstein-Barr virus. So I'm not in here exaggerating by saying textbook of immunology is wrong. That's one of the classical examples.
I'm sorry, I have another question. I had a patient who had very high IgM to mycoplasma, like in the 2000s. And I wondered, do you know anything from your reading, your studies that could cause that to occur? The IgM that was so high.
Okay. The question was, she has a patient with very high level of IgM. Normal IgM around 280, maximum 300 microgram or milligram per deciliter. Now, 2,000?
For years.
That's huge. Okay. Right away, you have to do a test called immunofixation electrophoresis. If the IgM band will be strong, you should look into possible multiple myeloma. Because always ask, what is our total IgG or IgM? Where is it coming from? Okay. When a child is born, you look at IgG, is about 250. When you look at adults, is about 1,000. So where that 750 came from? Our daily exposure to the environmental factors, to bacteria, viruses, parasites, food, is making the total immunoglobulins. So in this case, your patient is reacting to something.
And it's not the mycoplasma with the IgM, it's the IgM to mycoplasma that was so high.
Mycoplasma, I don't believe could be. That will be only 10 units, 20 units. From 300 will go to 320, but to 2,000, only if something happened to the level, to the B cells. B cells go crazy, divide and make lots of IgM. And you have to be very careful. Hopefully that patient is not having multiple myeloma, which is a cancer of the immune system. So do that test, please.
There's a therapy that a lot of functional medicine doctors, or some functional medicine doctors, are doing now. And basically, they're giving patients very microscopic, actually homeopathic levels of food antigens. And they're getting their bodies to become tolerant to those foods. How does that fit? Does that make sense? Does that fit into this picture? Can you become tolerant to a food you're not tolerant with by using, well, like one of the therapies is called low-dose immunotherapy?
The answer is absolutely yes.
Okay.
Not only for food, you can do it with tissue.
Yes.
Also, for example, if you can read in the journals that if you spray insulin into the nose or put it under the tongue, you can desensitize patients with type 1 diabetes or even type 2 diabetes sometimes. Now, many years ago, Dr. Hafler from Harvard Medical School, then 25 years ago, he raised 20 million or 25, 30 million dollars, then was a lot of money, to do that with myelin basic protein for patients with multiple sclerosis. And just giving very low doses of myelin basic protein under the tongue, and they were looking for improvement in the symptomatology of patients with multiple sclerosis. Unfortunately, did not work. Why? Because every person requires different dose. So it depends from antigen to antigen. Collagen given for arthritis, it worked significantly. Food is the most successful. So I have a friend, an ENT, had allergy to shrimp. If he had contact with shrimp, immediately to the hospital. Type 1 allergy, immediately. So I was having dinner with him. His name is Dan Dantini, an ENT. And in the restaurant, this was 20 years ago, he ordered shrimp. I said, "Are you crazy? What are you doing? You want to kill yourself?" He said, "Wait." So he takes a bottle with droplets, and he puts few drops of that under the tongue, and he eats the whole plate of shrimp. Nothing happened to him. But it takes guts to do that, right? So, I have seen many of these. Now, what is the mechanism? Okay, because here we have to talk about mechanism. When I was talking about T helper 1, T helper 2, you remember?
Yeah.
There is a policeman in between, okay? The policeman keeping the balance. It's called regulatory T cells, T-reg cells. They used to call that the suppressor cells. Now the name is T-reg cell. The job of that cell is to regulate the immune system. So when you give food antigen under the tongue at very low doses, you are going to activate the Treg cells, balancing the immune system, and therefore you get very, very positive results with that.
Dr. Harani is going to speak at our meeting in July about low-dose immunotherapy.
Yeah, at American Academy of Environmental Medicine, for classical allergy, they do it for many, many years with great success. Now, the real allergists, not the AAEM, they are not real allergists, but now the real allergists are taking over. It's so successful. They're taking over and they are implementing that in their practice. Questions?
We have any further questions? Sure.
I get confused. Which one do you give for the T helper? And which one do you give the T?
We call that T helper 1, T helper 2. The in between is T helper 3 or Treg cell.
Right, no, I'm talking about, you said to give worms versus.
Ah, okay, okay. The worms, if you are Th1 dominant by giving worms, that activates T helper 2 and then goes back to balance.
What do you give the T?
Because when you have worms in your body, what kind of antibody you are going to make? IgE, right? Right? Okay, thank you. So that's exactly what is activating T helper 2. That is going to balance Th1 and Th2 back to normal.
And the other way? If it's the other way, what do you give?
The other ways, why, you want to induce allergy? We are not interested in that.
Well, maybe it's a way to reduce autoimmunity.
Yeah, yeah. The bottom line is this.
I know Dr. Karazi
To
has-
regulate the Treg cells is the answer for autoimmunity.
I've seen lists of supplements, some which stimulate Th1, some which stimulate Th2.
Like DHEA.
There's a whole list of them.
Yeah, there's
you know?
T's and there's different things Verizon talks about, TH2 and TH1.
So we are done?
We are done. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.